Imagine a young nun, barely 21, walking into a convent kitchen in the early hours of dawn. She is barefoot, humble, and quiet, clutching a steel tumbler to fetch some water. Within minutes, she disappears forever, her lifeless body later found floating in a well inside the convent grounds. For nearly 3 decades, no one knew the truth of what happened that morning. But when the truth finally came out, it was darker, more disturbing, and more shocking than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of Sister Abhaya. And tonight, on The Twisted Minds, we're going to take you inside one of India's most haunting murder mysteries. A case that took 28 years to solve, shattered faith for millions, and revealed secrets the church tried to bury. Stay with us till the end, because the hook of this case will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, power, and justice. And before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to The Twisted Minds, because stories like this deserve to be told, and your support helps us bring you the darkest truths from around the world. It was March 27, 1992. Kottayam, a quiet town in Kerala, India, was still waking up when the convent bell rang its usual morning call for prayers. The nuns gathered, but one was missing. Sister Abhaya. She had been seen just before dawn, walking to the kitchen, but after that, nothing. Panic spread through the convent when she didn't appear for morning rituals. Soon, someone noticed something strange. The heavy wooden lid of the convent's backyard well was slightly open. When they peered inside, what they saw froze their hearts. Sister Abhaya's body was floating face down, her white habit soaked, her long hair tangled in the water, lifeless. The serene convent instantly turned into a crime scene. At first glance, many wanted to believe it was a tragic accident. A slip in the dark, a fall into the well, maybe even suicide, but almost immediately inconsistencies began to surface. Abhaya's body had bruises, deep cuts on her head, and marks on her neck. Her slippers were neatly placed in the kitchen. There was no sign of panic, no sign of a desperate attempt to climb out. Something didn't add up. But within hours, the local police shockingly dismissed the case, writing it off as suicide. The file was closed as quickly as it was opened. Yet, the people of Kerala refused to stay silent. Who was Sister Abhaya? Born in a simple Christian family in Kottayam, her real name was Beena Thomas. She was devoted, cheerful, and deeply religious, choosing the path of becoming a nun while still in her teens. Friends remembered her as full of life, someone who smiled easily and never shied away from helping others. The idea that she would kill herself was not just unbelievable, it was insulting. Her parents, neighbors, and parishioners all cried foul. They demanded answers. But every time the truth seemed within reach, it slipped further away. What followed was one of the longest, most twisted legal battles in Indian history. Evidence disappeared, files were tampered with, and witnesses mysteriously changed their statements. The police dragged their feet. The church kept silent, and the truth about Sister Abhaya seemed buried with her in that cold well. Yet, there were people who refused to give up. Activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens kept shouting for justice. For them, this was not just about a nun. It was about faith itself, about proving that no one, not even the most powerful institution, is above the law. The early investigations revealed shocking details. A forensic report showed that Abhaya had suffered head injuries before her death. But those reports mysteriously vanished. Later, when her clothes and medical evidence were sent for analysis, they were tampered with beyond recognition. At every turn, it looked like someone powerful was working behind the scenes, making sure the truth never saw the light of day, and the question burned brighter each day. What secret had Sister Abhaya stumbled upon in that convent kitchen that cost her life? For years, the case went back and forth, from state police to the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, the country's highest investigative authority. The file kept changing hands. But every time it landed on someone's desk, the conclusion was the same: suicide. It was almost as if the system itself was warning everyone not to dig deeper. But truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how hard you try to bury it. And when it finally did, decades later, it would expose not just a murder, but an entire web of corruption, betrayal, an abuse of power inside the very walls where Sister Abhaya had devoted her life to God. This was only the beginning. What really happened in those early hours of March 27, 1992? Who was in the convent that night? And why did so many powerful people work so hard to cover up the truth? In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the cover-ups, the lies, and the shocking secrets that turned Sister Abhaya's murder into one of India's most disturbing unsolved cases. The days following Sister Abhaya's death were filled with confusion, fear, and a suffocating silence. The convent walls whispered stories, but none dared to speak out loud. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, almost everyone in Kottayam knew something darker had happened. But the real tragedy was not just the death of one young nun. It was how swiftly the system worked to bury the truth. The very institutions meant to protect justice became part of the machinery of silence. The cover-up began almost immediately, and for the next 28 years, the fight for justice would resemble a battle between ordinary citizens and an untouchable empire. When the local police first arrived, they treated the case like a routine incident. No photographs of the crime scene were properly taken. No attempt was made to preserve evidence. The body was removed from the well in haste, with officers more concerned about avoiding scandal than solving a crime. And then, like a final insult, the death was labeled as suicide. The file could have ended there, gathering dust in a forgotten cabinet. If not for the persistence of one group, the people of Kerala who refused to forget Sister Abhaya's face. Her family cried foul. Activists shouted in the streets. Newspapers picked up the story, and soon the whispers became a storm too loud to ignore. By 1993, the case had been handed over to the Central Bureau of Investigation, or CBI. This was supposed to be the turning point, the moment truth would finally shine through the fog of lies. But to the shock of many, even the CBI initially filed a report declaring it a suicide. Imagine that India's top investigators, supposedly free from local influence, echoing the same old lie. Public outrage exploded. How could a nun with blunt injuries on her head and a body found in suspicious circumstances simply have taken her own life? Something was deeply wrong, and the people were right. It was around this time that small but powerful cracks began to appear in the wall of silence. One of the first whistleblowers was a retired police officer named Varghese, who claimed he was pressured to destroy key evidence in the early investigation. Another was a forensic expert, Dr. B. Omadathan, who openly stated that Sister Abhaya's head injuries could never have been self-inflicted. These voices were like sparks in the dark, refusing to be silenced. Yet every time the truth seemed close, someone powerful snuffed it out. Files disappeared, witnesses changed statements, and investigators mysteriously reversed their findings. But behind the curtain of manipulation, rumors began to swirl. Abhaya, it was said, may have stumbled upon something in the convent that she was never meant to see. Perhaps she witnessed acts forbidden by the church, acts that could destroy reputations. And for that mistake, simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, she paid with her life. This possibility turned the case from a tragedy into a scandal of explosive proportions. Because if true, it meant that men of God, respected priests, and powerful nuns had blood on their hands. And worse, it meant that the very institution meant to protect the innocent was actively hiding the guilty. The years rolled on, and with them, frustration grew. By the early 2000s, it seemed Sister Abhaya's case was destined to remain one of India's great unsolved mysteries. But the people refused to give up. Activists like Joman Puthen Parakal took up the case relentlessly, filing petitions, demanding accountability, and keeping the story alive in the media. Without them, the name Sister Abhaya might have vanished from memory. Instead, she became a symbol, a reminder that truth can be delayed, but not denied. The real breakthrough came in 2007, when the CBI, under immense pressure, reopened the investigation for the third time. This time, they took a radical step. They used modern scientific techniques, including narco-analysis tests on several suspects within the convent. The results sent shockwaves through India. The tests revealed that 2 priests and a nun had been present in the convent at the time of Abhaya's death, and that she may have walked in on them in a compromising situation. Instead of protecting her, they silenced her forever. For the first time, there were names, faces, and a motive. But even then, the battle was far from over. The church's influence was massive. Lawyers fought tooth and nail to dismiss the narco analysis results, calling them inadmissible. The accused priests and none denied everything. Political forces seemed to rally around them. And year after year, court hearings dragged on. To the outside world, it seemed like nothing was happening. But to those following closely, it was clear the walls of secrecy were slowly, painfully being chipped away. And with each blow, the truth came closer to daylight. By now, Sister Abhaya's parents had grown old and frail. They had spent decades waiting for justice, attending hearing after hearing, watching powerful men and women walk free, while their daughter lay in the grave. Their faith in the system was crushed, but they still clung to hope. "All we want is the truth," her father once said, his voice breaking. "We want to know who killed our child." His words echoed in every Indian home that had followed the case. This was no longer just about Abhaya. It was about every ordinary person who had ever been silenced by power. The narco analysis revelations marked the beginning of the end for the cover-up. But the fight ahead was long and bitter. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the suspects, the courtroom battles, and the extraordinary courage it took to finally bring Sister Abhaya's killers to trial. By the mid-2000s, Sister Abhaya's name had become a symbol of resistance. The whispers of a cover-up had grown into loud demands for accountability. After nearly 15 years of lies, stalled investigations, and intimidation, the case finally took a dramatic turn when the narco analysis results pointed fingers directly at two priests, Father Thomas Kotor and Father Jose Puthrikil, and a nun, Sister Sephi. For many, this was the first time the veil of secrecy was lifted. But naming the suspects was only the beginning. The road to justice would be long, brutal, and filled with betrayals. The allegations were shocking. According to investigators, in the early hours of March 27, 1992, Sister Abhaya had walked into the convent kitchen unsuspecting. But at that very moment, inside the convent, something forbidden was happening. Two priests and a nun were allegedly engaged in acts that would have destroyed their holy image if exposed. Abhaya, innocent and unknowing, stumbled upon this dark secret. In that split second, the accused realized her presence could end everything. What happened next was chilling. They attacked her with a blunt weapon, striking her head. When she collapsed, unconscious but alive, they dragged her to the well and threw her inside, making it look like a suicide. A simple act of violence, born out of fear of exposure, turned into a calculated murder that would haunt India for decades. But proving this in court was another story. The accused were not ordinary citizens. They were powerful figures within the church. The church, in turn, was deeply connected to politics, law enforcement, and local society. Every move against them was met with immense resistance. Witnesses were threatened, evidence was questioned. And yet, the CBI refused to step back this time. Forensic reports showed head injuries inconsistent with suicide. Abhaya's clothes, though tampered with, still revealed signs of struggle. And the narco analysis tapes, even if not admissible in court, painted a disturbing picture of guilt. The walls of silence were crumbling. The defense, however, was ruthless. They argued that Abhaya had been depressed, that she may have killed herself due to personal struggles. They painted her as fragile, emotionally unstable, unable to bear the pressures of convent life. But this narrative was met with outrage from her family and the public. Those who knew her remembered her as bright, strong-willed, and deeply committed to her faith. The idea of her taking her own life was not just far-fetched, it was insulting. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a fight for her dignity. Court hearings dragged on year after year, often ending in adjournments, delays, and procedural roadblocks. Many began to believe that the case would never reach a conclusion. By 2008, the accused priests and nun had even managed to secure bail, walking free while the trial crawled forward. For the Abhaya family, it was a daily nightmare, seeing the very people accused of murdering their daughter moving about in society with impunity. Her parents grew weaker with time, their faces lined with sorrow, but every time they felt like giving up, ordinary citizens came forward to support them. Candlelight marches, protests, and petitions kept the pressure alive. The people of Kerala refused to forget. Journalists played a vital role too. Newspapers and TV channels began highlighting every twist and turn of the trial. They exposed the irregularities, the political influence, and the relentless efforts to suppress evidence. It was this media spotlight that ensured the case could never quietly disappear again. The story of a young nun, silenced for seeing what she shouldn't have, became a nationwide obsession. Abhaya's photograph, smiling, innocent, with eyes full of life, appeared in every article, every protest banner, a haunting reminder of why this fight mattered. As the years passed, the accused clung to their power. They hired the best lawyers, exploited every loophole, and tried to discredit the investigation at every turn. Yet, cracks continued to appear. A crucial moment came when one of the CBI officials testified that he had been pressured to file the case as a suicide. This revelation confirmed what many had suspected all along, that the system had been manipulated from the very beginning. Each new testimony was like a puzzle piece, slowly forming the picture of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the convent walls. But the most haunting part of this chapter wasn't just the evidence or the courtroom drama. It was the human cost. Sister Abhaya's parents lived every day with the weight of unanswered questions. Her father, before his death, said in an interview, "My daughter was innocent. She believed in God. She trusted the convent, and that trust killed her." His voice cracked, his hands trembled, and in his eyes there was both sorrow and anger. For her mother, the pain was even greater. She would often say she felt her daughter's presence, as if Abhaya was still waiting for her voice to be heard. It was these raw emotions that kept the case alive in the hearts of millions. By the late 2010s, the trial was entering its final stages. Decades had passed, witnesses had aged, and evidence had been tampered with beyond recognition. But the determination of activists, journalists, and ordinary people refused to let it die. Everyone knew that if justice was denied in this case, it would send a chilling message. That the powerful can kill and get away with it. That faith can be exploited. That truth can be buried forever. The stakes were higher than ever. The world was about to witness a verdict that would either restore faith in justice or shatter it completely. In the next chapter, we'll walk through the final trial, the defense and prosecution's last battles, and the moment when, after 28 long years, the truth finally emerged. By 2018, the Sister Abhaya case had become more than just a trial. It had become a test of India's justice system itself. For 26 years, every twist and turn had been closely followed by millions. People had grown older watching this case unfold, entire generations knowing Sister Abhaya's name as a symbol of injustice. And now, finally, the trial was reaching its climax. The accused, Father Thomas Couture and Sister Sephi, were in the dock, their every expression scrutinized. The third accused, Father Jose Puthrikiel, had already been discharged earlier due to lack of evidence, a decision that sparked outrage. But at least two still stood accused, and for the first time in decades, it felt like justice might be possible. The courtroom was tense. On one side sat the defense, armed with top lawyers, determined to dismantle the prosecution's case. Their strategy was simple: paint the investigation as flawed, the evidence as unreliable, and the accusations as baseless. They argued that the narco-analysis results were inadmissible in court, that the forensic evidence had been tampered with, and that the prosecution's story was built more on speculation than proof. Again and again, they returned to the idea of suicide, that Abhaya, like many young nuns, may have struggled with depression and chosen to end her life. It was a narrative designed to sow doubt, and doubt, after all, could be enough to set the accused free. But the prosecution refused to let the case crumble. They brought forward every shred of evidence that had survived the decades. Forensic experts testified that the head injuries were consistent with assault, not suicide. Witnesses recalled the suspicious behavior of the accused on the morning of the murder. Investigators described how key evidence had been deliberately tampered with, and how earlier officers had been pressured to bury the truth. Piece by piece, they rebuilt the story of that fateful morning. Abhaya, Walking into the kitchen, the accused, caught in a compromising situation. The sudden violence to silence her, and the hurried attempt to cover it up by throwing her into the convent well. Perhaps the most chilling part of the trial was the testimony about Sister Sephi. According to investigators, she had undergone a medical procedure years earlier to surgically remove her uterus, an operation allegedly meant to conceal evidence of her illicit relationships. This revelation stunned the courtroom and further destroyed the defense's image of her as a devout, innocent nun. The priests, too, were portrayed as men who had broken their vows and used their power to hide behind the cloak of holiness. The contrast between their sacred positions and the allegations against them sent shockwaves across the country. But the defense was relentless. They argued that the CBI had framed the priests and nun to satisfy public outrage. They claimed the evidence was circumstantial at best and that the entire narrative rested on a theory with no solid foundation. Where is the eyewitness? Where is the direct proof? They asked again and again, hoping to plant seeds of doubt in the judge's mind. It was a battle not just of facts but of perceptions, whether the truth could shine through decades of darkness and manipulation. Outside the courtroom, emotions ran high. Every hearing was followed by protests, prayers, and candlelight vigils. People gathered outside with placards reading, "Justice for Sister Abhaya," and "Truth cannot be buried." For many, this was personal. They saw in Abhaya their daughter, their sister, their friend. They saw in the accused a betrayal of faith itself. And as the trial dragged on, the tension only grew. Would the court finally acknowledge what everyone knew deep in their hearts? Or would the powerful once again walk free? Inside the convent, silence remained. The church maintained its distance, careful not to openly support the accused, but equally careful not to condemn them. For an institution built on faith, this silence was deafening. To many believers, it felt like abandonment, a refusal to confront the darkness within its own walls. But to others, it was proof of how deeply the church's influence ran, how even in the face of damning allegations, it could shield its own. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere was electric. The prosecution reminded the court of the decades of lies, the tampered evidence, the intimidation of witnesses. They painted the accused not just as murderers, but as betrayers of trust, people who used their sacred robes as shields for their sins. The defense countered by hammering on the lack of direct evidence, insisting that doubt was enough to acquit. Both sides knew this was not just another case. This was history in the making. And then, after 28 long years of waiting, the moment came. The trial had reached its final stages, and the court prepared to deliver its verdict. Outside, crowds gathered, holding candles and pictures of Sister Abhaya, their prayers mixing with their fear. For almost 3 decades, they had waited for this day. The question was no longer just about who killed Abhaya. It was about whether truth and justice could survive against power and corruption. On December 22, 2020, the people of Kerala held their breath. The wait was over. After 28 years of investigations, cover-ups and court battles, the special CBI court in Thiruvananthapuram was finally ready to pronounce judgment in the Sister Abhaya case. Crowds gathered outside, clutching candles and photographs of the young nun who had died all those years ago. For her family, it was the moment they had prayed for through decades of grief. For her supporters, it was a test of faith in the justice system. Inside the courtroom, the accused, Father Thomas Kotor and Sister Sephi, sat in silence, their faces pale, knowing that their fates were about to be sealed. The judge read out the verdict slowly, carefully. The evidence was circumstantial, but overwhelming. The court declared both Father Kotor and Sister Sephi guilty of the murder of Sister Abhaya. The words fell like thunder. Guilty. After nearly 3 decades, the truth that so many had tried to bury had finally risen to the surface. The court sentenced Father Kotor to life imprisonment for murder and Sister Sephi to life imprisonment as well. For the first time, justice had spoken for Abhaya. The crowd outside erupted in tears, prayers, and cries of relief. It was a victory not just for one family, but for every voice that had fought against silence. The verdict shocked the nation. Here were 2 figures once respected as symbols of faith, now branded as murderers. The revelation that a nun had been killed by her own colleagues within the church was disturbing enough, but the decades-long cover-up made it even more horrifying. It wasn't just about a murder. It was about an institution that had shielded the guilty, manipulated the system, and tried to crush the truth. For many believers, it was a painful reckoning. How could the very people entrusted with guiding souls to God betray that trust in the worst possible way? The case forced millions to confront uncomfortable questions about power, faith, and corruption. For Sister Abhaya's parents, however, the verdict came too late. Her father had passed away years earlier, without ever seeing justice for his daughter. Her mother, frail and aging, wept when she heard the news. She said simply, "No, my daughter can rest in peace." Her words captured the heartbreak of a family that had lost everything but still clung to hope. The verdict did not bring Abhaya back, but it restored her dignity. No longer could anyone dismiss her death as suicide. No longer could anyone smear her memory. She was not a troubled girl who ended her life. She was a victim of a crime, silenced because she saw the truth. The aftermath of the case rippled across India. The church remained largely silent, refusing to comment publicly on the conviction of its priests and nuns. For many, that silence was as damning as the verdict itself. Activists who had fought tirelessly for decades were hailed as heroes. Journalists who had kept the story alive felt vindicated. And ordinary citizens who had lit candles year after year finally felt that their voices had mattered. The Sister Abhaya case became a reminder that persistence can overcome power, that truth can survive even when buried under lies for decades. But there was also sadness. 28 years is a lifetime. In that time, evidence was lost, witnesses died, and memories faded. Justice delayed was, in many ways, justice denied. Abhaya's youth, her dreams, her future, everything was stolen in a single night, and no verdict could return it. Yet, her case left behind a legacy. It showed the cracks in the system, but it also showed the strength of ordinary people who refused to be silenced. In the end, Sister Abhaya's story was not just about her death. It was about resilience, about never giving up on the truth, no matter how long it takes. Today, when people remember Sister Abhaya, they don't just think of the young nun whose life was cut short. They think of the movement that rose in her name. They think of the candlelight vigils, the headlines, the activists, and the countless ordinary citizens who kept asking one simple question: what really happened to Sister Abhaya? And in answering that question, they gave her the justice she was denied for so long. As we close this story on the Twisted Minds, let us remember why cases like this matter. They remind us that the fight for truth is never easy, but it is always worth it. They remind us that silence can be deadly, but persistence can move mountains. And most of all, they remind us that justice, no matter how delayed, can still bring peace. If you've been moved by Sister Abhaya's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to The Twisted Minds, because we will continue bringing you the darkest, most haunting true crime stories that the world must not forget. And now, as the candles burn for Sister Abhaya, one truth remains clear: lies can last a season, but truth lasts forever.